And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
Go ahead and say it, Ed. Go Tigers!
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
You like that? You like that?
F it. Jamar's down there somewhere.
The New Orleans Saints select Marcus Davenport.
No!
Splash Brothers? Yeah.
It's playoff. Keep going, Brace.
The playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
With some word of prayer as we normally do, and we're going to be praying for some of the same thing that we've been praying for several weeks. Want to pray for Norkay, Meredith, and Jonesboro and Israel. We've been praying for these things for quite some time, and these are some big things. That we've been praying for a while. So we're going to keep praying for those. Lord, just thank you for continuing to bless us with this wonderful game of football and this these fantasy sports that we love to enjoy and fellowship in your name, Lord. Just please be with Norkay and her family as she continues to undergo treatment for her cancer, and please give her the strength and courage to continue to fight, and just lay your hand, and we just pray for complete healing on her, Lord, and just give her family strength and courage as well to help her battle this as she is, Lord. Just also be with Jonesboro as they're continuing to recover from all those tragedies that they've had over the last couple months, and just be with the families affected, Lord, and the people affected. Just please help them turn to you to heal, Lord, and help just kind of give them comfort during this process. And then also be with the people in Israel as they're undergoing the attack. Lord, just please be with the people under attack, and be with the people that are attacking them to help them see you and cease that attack, Lord, and just lead them to you, Lord. Just be with the people that are affected over there, and just put a hedge of protection over them, and please help the violence cease, Lord. And just please be with us as we go throughout our lives every day, Lord, and just trying to shine a light for you and serve for you, Lord, and help us, forgive us where we fail you, and just help us turn people to you, Lord. In your name we pray, amen. All right, guys, jumping right on in here. We're going to go through our sponsors real quick. Thank you for supporting us. Big Reed BBQ, Automotive Detailing Solutions, This Little Piggy Barbecue Food Truck, Mimi's Children's Boutique, and Doug DeMona Farm and Feed. Thank y'all for supporting us. We appreciate it. Y'all support them. And our title sponsor for this episode is going to be Big Reed BBQ. Started as a family recipe in 1986, our mild flavor is right on time, and our spicy is just enough heat. Owner Ken Reed and Director of Marketing Andre Leonard say you can get their sauce at Doug DeMona Farm and Feed, Time to Shine Detail, the Salty Brahma, and the Equipment Store, and Amazon. That is correct. You can get it on Amazon also. That is one of the best ways, because you can order and get it straight to your house. But if not, please support these other local businesses by going there and also picking up some Big Reed barbecue. As we're in football season, that's some of the best time to barbecue. Throw some ribs on there and throw some Big Reed barbecue sauce on them. We appreciate Big Reed barbecue supporting us. Y'all go out and support them. Thank y'all. Jumping right on in, some news and injury updates. Daniel Jones tore his ACL. That pretty much means Giants fantasy football players are almost completely irrelevant, and except for Saquon Barkley, who at this point, with no other fantasy relevant players on the team and defenses keying in on him, he's probably maybe a high-end RB2 right now. I mean, that's about all you can say about it, because the chances of him getting touchdowns are pretty much slim to none. He's going to get targets. He's going to get some catches. He's going to get some volume, but it's not going to be high quality. And unfortunately for Saquon owners, that is what it is, unless they go possibly and sign Carson Wentz, because Tyrod Taylor was put on IR. Even if they get Carson Wentz or Matt Ryan or one of these guys that's away from football right now, not on a team, if they get them, it's still going to be at least a week before they get up to speed on the offense. So right now, Daniel Jones torn ACL out for the rest of the year. Tyrod Taylor on IR. They're pretty much starting Danny DeVito's cousin. I don't even remember his name. Tommy DeVito, I believe, is what it is. But yeah, it might be Dan DeVito's son. Heck, he's young enough. But yeah, he does not throw does not throw the ball very well. I mean, we talked a little bit about that before, but it's pretty much irrelevant at this point. Also, poor Giants teams. Waller was placed on IR with a hamstring injury also before this week. So one less tight end out there. So Waller on IR, just another Giant going down. But we're going to talk about some tight end replacements here a little bit later on. Also, Dallas Goedert has a forearm fracture and had surgery today. Will miss a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks. Will probably be placed on IR, so it means at least a minimum of 4 weeks. Good thing is they're go ahead and get the surgery out of the way so he can be healing. It's going to be stable. They just got to give once they do the surgery, you got to give the bone a little bit of time to heal before he gets back out there. But they're saying at least a minimum of 4 weeks, so that he'll probably be placed on IR. Also, Cam Akers goes down with an Achilles tear, and this is his second Achilles tear of this leg, and he is out for the rest of the year. He'll probably undergo surgery. That means Madison gets the full workload again. Also, we'll probably be seeing Ty Chandler work in, but Alexander Madison getting full workload. And honestly, it might not be too bad with Josh Dobbs leading that offense. We're going to talk about him in a little bit here in just a little bit. So also a little bit more news, which I'm going to talk about him here in a minute. But I just got an update on my phone that Arizona Cardinals coach Jonathan Gannon announced Kyler Murray will start Sunday against the Falcons if all goes well in practice this week. So he's going to take reps with the starters this week, and he will start as of right now, which is huge news for Arizona Cardinals fantasy players for sure. But going right on into our waiver wire pickups. Number 1 at quarterback, going to be the same guy again because he did it again this past week. He's being pretty consistent right now. It's going to be Derek Carr for New Orleans Saints. Honestly, until I got this update just now with Kyler Murray starting, Kyler Murray would be number 1 for me on this list now that we know he's starting for sure. I'm going to talk about Derek Carr, but we're going to get to Kyler Murray here in just a minute. But just know that I would have Kyler Murray first now that we do know he's starting instead. But Derek Carr owned 35% of leagues. This week he's going to be at Minnesota. And while he isn't blowing it up, like as far as offensively, like, you probably want in a quarterback, he's also not really letting you down. He's got a pretty solid floor. This is the 4th straight week with 20 or more fantasy points, and his 2nd straight with at least 2 passing touchdowns and a 70% or higher completion percentage. That's great consistency, great numbers coming out of your New Orleans quarterback. And as we talked about at the beginning of the year, New Orleans Saints have one of the easiest offensive schedules of the year. So he's going to be coming down the stretch, going to be giving you some good matchups. Now he's got a nice little rivalry game this week coming up against Minnesota defense, who's ranked 22nd against the quarterback so far this year. And they're giving up an average of 20.5 points a game to fantasy quarterbacks. And that's right in line, honestly, for the last 4 weeks. So that's a pretty safe floor. Not a crazy high ceiling. Like, we're probably not going to see him put up 35, 40 fantasy points. But I really think a solid 20-point fantasy week is what we're expecting. 20 to 30 at the most, just because Taysom Hill's getting in there, getting some snaps at quarterback, also taking away some of that production from Derek Carr. But Derek Carr's being very efficient the last couple of weeks, and he's playing at Minnesota, which could be a shootout depending on how Minnesota's offense does with Josh Dobbs at the helm against the New Orleans defense. But I like Derek Carr a lot. Number 2 for me, which would be number 3 with Kyler Murray coming in at number 1 now. Number 2 is going to be Baker Mayfield, owned in 45.4% leagues. Honestly, just another real consistent floor, just like Derek Carr. Not anybody that's really going to blow it up each week, but somebody that can be very serviceable for you, especially with bye weeks and injuries that are going on right now. Anyway, he's very relevant fantasy quarterback now. especially with injuries. And I dare say he's probably a top 10 option currently with scoring at least 23 points the last 3 weeks in a row. Now he gets a matchup against a Tennessee defense. It's kind of middle of the pack against quarterbacks. But just 2 weeks ago, they sold off their best secondary player in Kevin Byard and really looked like they were ready to kind of give up. And then Will Levis kind of revived that team a little bit. But then this past week ended up not having that great of a week against Pittsburgh. But it wasn't that terrible either, but not a great fantasy week for him. But last week they gave up 17.84 fantasy points to Atlanta quarterbacks. And Lord knows Atlanta quarterbacks have not been doing anything to break the bank. So now Baker's going to be at home in what you might say a must-win game for Tampa Bay because they've been on a slide here lately, and the Saints have been surging. So if they want to keep their NFC hopes alive, NFC South hopes alive, they really got to win this game. And I think Baker steps it up with a lot of good pass-catching options there at Tampa Bay at home against Tennessee. This could be a great game for Baker for you to start him. If, say, you lost Daniel Jones or your quarterback's going to be on bye this week, something like that, Baker Mayfield could be a great fill-in option, or he might be somebody solid to start for you the rest of the season, honestly, the way he's been playing in some solid matchups. The number 3, which will be the number 1, not to get too confusing, but Kyler Murray, only owned in like 35.6% fantasy leagues. This week he's going to get Atlanta. Clayton Tune, honestly, a lot of this I'm going to talk about was pretty much just saying I expected Kyler Murray to start, but I didn't know yet because they hadn't announced it until just before. Clayton Tune looked terrible. I mean, he did not look like he was ready to play against Cleveland, obviously one of the best defenses in the league. Then he gets Atlanta, which is not exactly a cakewalk matchup for a rookie quarterback either. But now that Kyler Murray has been designated to return and should start for them, honestly, I believe on this career, Kyler Murray has averaged at least 40 yards rushing for every game just about that he's played. He's averaged that or something like that for every year since he's been in the league. Honestly, with him coming back from knee injury, I don't think you expect that right off, but after maybe 1 or 2 weeks, he's probably going to be getting you that again. And this is a big boost for all Arizona pass catchers because he is a lot much better passer than Clayton Tune and really Josh Dobbs, and they were serviceable with Josh Dobbs. So I like Kyler Murray a lot going forward for the rest of the season as long as he gets an opportunity and stays healthy. And then last but not least, definitely Josh Dobbs from Minnesota. He was on this list kind of at the end as a caveat last week. But this week he's going up against New Orleans. He's only on a 16.3% leagues. But we mentioned him last week, and we really didn't think it was going to be that impactful because they were going to start Jaron Hall, the rookie. But we didn't know that Hall was going to go out with a concussion in the early first half. Dobbs comes in and plays the hero for Minnesota and puts up a big fantasy week and puts up 28.9 fantasy points in 2/3 of the game for Minnesota last week and ended up winning. And what's even crazy is he did not take any snaps prior to going into the game for Minnesota last week. And there's been reports that he didn't even know some of the names of the pass catchers that he was throwing the ball to for Minnesota. He literally just goes in, gets out there, and wings it, and puts up 28.9 fantasy points for Minnesota. Now, that was obviously a lot better matchup for him against Atlanta than it will be against New Orleans. But this just goes to show you, with him being able to practice the game plan, work with the players he's going to be throwing the ball, it's going to get a little bit better for him. Now, it's going to be a tougher matchup against New Orleans this week, but I really think Josh Dobbs got a chance to be a very fantasy relevant quarterback for the rest of the season with the playmakers he's got in that offense. TJ Hawkinson, Justin Jefferson should be coming back within the next couple of weeks. They have not decided how long or when he will come back yet, but he should be coming back sometime within the next couple of weeks. So we like the chances of Josh Dobbs. Alexander Madison looked a little bit better this past week, getting him the ball. So look for Josh Dobbs to be fantasy relevant again at quarterback. So that's going to round out my quarterback segment. And we're going to roll right on into running backs. And honestly, this might be less than last week, which was bleak to say the best. I'm going to give you 4 options at running back, but honestly, none of them I feel comfortable with hardly at all. Like if you're looking for somebody to start at RB2, unfortunately for you, there's really nobody on this list that I would do that. There's a couple guys that I might would start at flex. If you're desperate, you can start these guys, but really none of them are like locks to be good running backs going forward. But some of them have a good potential, but I'm going to go and roll into it. Number 1 for me has got to be Dante Foreman. Owned in 46.5% of leagues. Last week got 20 carries against New Orleans. I mean, really, it's hard to predict anything for this backfield of Chicago right now at all because their volume. I mean, we're just trying to follow the volume in production. In the last 4 weeks, that's been Dante Foreman. He's getting an average of 15 carries and at least 2 catches in those 4 weeks. And the only caveat is if Khalil Herbert doesn't come back from injured reserve. Now, I did get a notification earlier that they have designated Khalil Herbert to come back, which means he's going to start practicing with the team, but he has not been activated off IR yet. So he's going to start practicing this week, but if he doesn't get activated, I think it's the Dante Foreman show for 1 more week. But if they do activate Herbert off IR from practice, I mean, I think we're looking at a minimum of 50-50 workload between Foreman and Herbert. If not, we go right back to the Herbert show and they put Foreman back on the practice squad, which would be, not that great for Foreman owners. But unfortunately, this is just a situation we got to watch. But neither Foreman nor Herbert are owned in more than 60% of leagues because right now Herbert is only owned in like 57.6% of leagues. So I would get out there and look, see if Foreman or Herbert are owned. If either one of them are owned in your league, pick both of them up. Or long-term, pick up Herbert. Short-term, pick up Foreman. But either way, this backfield's really up for grabs. And if you're needing somebody going forward for the rest of the season, say you had a season-ending injury, this is a backfield that you could take advantage of that has actually had a fair amount of opportunity. And then they get Carolina this week in one of the worst run defenses in the league. So, I mean, it's a bad situation with a great matchup is the best way you can put it. So keep an eye on Chicago's backfield. Number 2 for me has got to be Keaton Mitchell. This is a guy owned in 1% of league for Baltimore. He was on this list like 2 or 3 weeks ago because he got activated off IR. And I was reading about him, and they were talking about how explosive he was in the preseason. Then he goes on IR with an injury, a knee injury. And I was hearing about him coming back, being activated. Several analysts have been talking about, and beat writers talking about his big play potential, how they expect him to be involved in this backfield. So I threw him on the list, on the waiver wire list, just in case he got some carries. And he didn't even get a touch. So I took him back off the list, and haven't really heard much about him. Well, this week he shows up. Okay, gets 9 carries for 138 yards and a touchdown, with runs of 60 and 40 yards. He ran a 4.3740 in the combine this past year. He's a rookie. But who this really screams to me is Devin Achane. I mean, this really sounded like a Devin Achane when he kind of broke out for Miami. 9 for 138 in the stat line, 6 big chunk yardage runs. Not saying he's going to be Devin Achane, but this really sounds like he has that explosive ability. And with a good O-line, run-blocking O-line that Baltimore has, and a team that really likes to run the ball like Baltimore, I think you could do worse than picking up this guy, stashing him on your bench to see what he can do with the opportunity. And he get 9 for 138 and a touchdown on 18% snap count. If he only had an 18% snap count and he got 9 carries, that means he probably got just about a carry every time he got in the game. And if he had that kind of production, then I think that his snap count only goes up. We've seen Justice Hill with a 61% snap count that didn't do hardly anything with as efficiency goes in that. So I really think there's a good chance they give Mitchell more work. It's not guaranteed. Obviously, in Baltimore, they always have a big rotation at running back, but it's a tough matchup this week with Cleveland. But if you got a bench stash spot, I say you pick up Mitchell and see what happens going forward. Number 3 for me is going to be Antonio Gibson, owned in 40.3% of fantasy leagues in Washington. This week he's going at Seattle. definitely more of a deeper league ad or a flex play for bye weeks or something like that, but you can't ignore his pass volume. He's gotten at least 5 targets with 5 catches the last 2 weeks, which is a great volume for a running back. He's also averaging a much better yards per carry average in the last couple weeks than Brian Robinson has. So I'm not saying that he's someone you should start weekly or anything like that, but he definitely could give you some help in the bye weeks with his pass catching volume. Not only that, but if for any reason Brian Robinson goes down with any sort of injury, I think Antonio Gibson jumps in right with at least a low end RB2 volume in the low end RB2 conversation with his pass catching volume and him getting a boost in the running game. But this week they're going to play at Seattle. I expect Seattle to probably be very productive offensively because Washington's defense, I mean, they had a fire sale and sold their 2 best defenders a couple of weeks ago. So I think Seattle coming off an embarrassing performance against Baltimore, putting up only 3 points. Or I think it was 3, maybe it was 7. Either way, it was very embarrassing performance for Seattle. I think they come out guns blazing against Washington, put up a lot of points. I think this is a game where Washington's having to throw the ball a lot, playing from behind. And I think there's a good chance Antonio Gibson gets a fair amount of run in this game as he has the last couple weeks. And we've seen that Sam Howell likes to throw the ball. Number 4 for me at running back is going to be Zach Charbonnet again. I told you last week it was going to be a tough matchup for him, and sure it was against Baltimore. Only put up like 2.6 fantasy points, which isn't saying much because Kenneth Walker only put up 2.7 fantasy points. But the thing to see from last week was for the second week in a row, Zach Charbonnet led the Seattle running backs with a little over a 50% snap count, a 55% snap count to be precise, with Kenneth Walker trailing him with like a 49% snap count. So this means one of 2 things. Either Zach Charbonnet has earned the extra snaps at running back, and this could continue to go forward, and Washington is a plus matchup for running backs. As I just said, they just sold off their 2 best defensive linemen right before the trade deadline. Or this means last week the Seattle offense was playing so terrible, getting blown out by Baltimore. They decided with Walker nursing an injury that they would just kind of keep him peeled back a little bit and let Zach Charbonnet kind of lead the way again for another week while they kind of took it easy on Kenneth Walker. And this next week, it could go back to the Kenneth Walker show against Washington, who's a much less formidable run defense. And then they let him take over. But if it is Zach Charbonnet gets the better percent of the snap count, I expect him to have a really good week against Washington. And he could be somebody, with being owned in only 30.4% of leagues, somebody you definitely want on your bench, or maybe even in the flex if you're hurting because of injury or a bye. So I think Zach Charbonnet is definitely somebody to have in your pocket. Not to mention if Kenneth Walker goes down with another injury, Zach Charbonnet is a guy that you're going to want to be playing. He has solid RB2 value if Kenneth Walker goes down. So that's going to round out my running back section, and we're going to roll right on into our wide receiver section. And this one's pretty juicy, guys. Number 1 for me has got to be Tank Dell. I hope you didn't give up. That's all I can say. I told you not to give up last week, to pick him up. It was a good position for him, and boy, did he capitalize. Finally, it's finally the blow-up game that we've been seeing coming for the last couple of weeks from Tank Dell. He's only owned in 55.7% of leagues. This week, he's going to be going up against Cincinnati. But last week, 11 targets, 6 catches, 114 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Man, that is big-time production out of somebody. And C.J. Stroud looked like he was back and took complete advantage of the Tampa Bay secondary that has been kind of reeling the last several weeks. And now, unfortunately, though, we're going back on the road for Houston, who does not seem to play too well on the road, but this is a pretty stingy Cincinnati defense. But what I'm seeing right now is the 11 targets that Tank Dell got. And if you're going up against a stingy defense for a team that doesn't play that well on the road, you want to follow the volume. And Tank Dell got the volume in this matchup. And not to mention, Cincinnati's offense has been playing very well. So I think Houston's offense is going to have to throw the ball a lot to keep up in this game with Cincinnati's offense. And I think Tank Dell is a flex play at worst, if not a low-end wide receiver too with bye weeks and injuries. I think if this volume continues, I mean, we're talking about a solid wide receiver to the rest of the season. If he gets 11 targets, 6 for 114 and 2, I don't think there's 2 touchdowns every game, obviously, but 6 or 7 catches for around 100 yards with 11 targets is not out of the ordinary for the rest of the year with Tank Dell. If he can get this volume and sustain it the rest of the year, and C.J. Stroud can keep doing what he's doing. So that's my number one pickup at wide receiver, and honestly, my number one pickup for all waiver wire options this week. Number 2's got to be Quentin Johnston for me. I'm recording this before the Chargers-Jets game on Monday night, but that still does not mean Quentin Johnston wouldn't be my number 2 even after, because we learned that over the weekend, Josh Palmer got put. I say Josh Palmer. I'm pretty sure it's Jordan Palmer. I apologize. Let me double check that. Yeah, Josh Palmer. Sorry. Josh Palmer got put on IR this weekend with his knee injury. So what that does, that pretty much thrusts Quentin Johnston that wide receiver 2 role for at least the next 4 weeks. And we already seen Quentin Johnston start to emerge over the last couple weeks, getting more and more targets, like I said, and being more productive than we have seen in the past. 7 targets 3 weeks ago, 7 targets week before last. Last week, only 4 targets against Chicago. But this week at the New York Jets, then he gets Detroit at home, which they're going to have to be throwing the ball to beat them. Then at Green Bay, and then at home against Baltimore. All of those games could be very beneficial for Palmer. I mean, not Palmer, for Johnston. I mean, really, the wide receiver 2 in the Los Angeles Chargers offense is going to be beneficial regardless. It's a tough matchup tonight against the Jets, but the Detroit matchup next week is going to be prime. So be on the lookout for Quentin Johnston. He's probably not going to be available or on this list next week because with Jordan Palmer going down, him being the wide receiver 2, there's a good chance that he's going to be over 60% owned, but he's a big-time playmaker. And if he gets the opportunity, I think there's no doubt that he can be productive and be able to put up some points in that offense. So that's my number 2. Number 3 is going to be Demario Douglas for me again. For New England, owned in 21.9% of fantasy leagues. This week, he's going up against the Indianapolis Colts. He didn't blow it up, which we weren't 100% sure that he was, but he didn't exactly fall flat either. 7 targets, 5 catches for 55 yards, and 1 carry. Tied for the team lead in targets with Juju and Hunter Henry, and led the team in receiving yards with 55 yards. Honestly, I really think this is about his floor that you could expect from Demario Douglas going forward, around 5 for 55. And what you're hoping for is that he gets a big play somewhere in there and maybe scores a touchdown. And then you're looking at a low-end wide receiver 2 at worst. He played in 83% of the snaps, and honestly, he's going to get plenty of chances to make big plays and score a touchdown. And Indianapolis is another solid matchup for him, and a team that they're probably going to have to score to keep up with because Indianapolis's offense is pretty solid. But just 2 weeks ago, they gave up 267 yards and a touchdown to the New Orleans Saints. So I think Douglas looks like he's a good chance to lead the team in receiving probably for the rest of the year. And I think he's somebody that's a flex play at worst for the rest of the year. And if he keeps seeing an uptick in his production and good matchups, could be a wide receiver 2 for you to fill in with injuries and bye weeks. So I like Demario Douglas a lot. And then last, but certainly not least on this list, Jackson Smith and Jigba for Seattle, or JSN for short, is what a lot of people call him. He's only owned in 55.5% of leagues, but this week he's getting a Washington matchup that is very, 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 very beneficial for him. And honestly, we could be seeing the beginning of JSN breaking out for Seattle. This past week, 7 targets, 6 catches for 63 yards on an 82% snap count for Seattle. Now, Seattle ran quite a they primarily ran 3 wide receiver sets, which included JSN, Lockett, and Metcalf, which all of them registered over an 80% snap count. But JSN outproduced all of them, with Lockett only drawing 1 more target, but had less catches, less receiving yards, and then Metcalf almost completely being obsolete. Now, it was a tough matchup against Baltimore, but this week they get the lowly Washington defense that traded pretty much all of their pass rush away right before the trade deadline. And we're going to be looking for Seattle to put up a lot of points because they really got embarrassed against Baltimore this past week. And I really think Seattle's going to come out guns a-blazing, trying to blow up the scoreboard to prove that, they're not a joke on offense like people are thinking they are, because Baltimore held them to 1 score. And I really think JSN is going to produce at least at a flex pace for the rest of the season, because the last several weeks he's been a lot more productive than we've seen. Not to mention he is a great, probably the number 1 handcuff at wide receiver in the league, because if Lockett or Metcalf go down, that means Smith and Jigba is going to be thrust into even a higher volume and target percentage than he has been. But he's already been outproducing them the last couple weeks. And he's only owned in 55.5% leagues. Not to mention, he was the number 1 rated wide receiver coming out of the draft this past year as a rookie. So we could be starting to see him start to emerge in the Seattle offense and somewhat start to take over, which is crazy because DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are great wide receivers, but that might be why it's just taking this long for him to start to emerge. So Jackson Smith and Jigba, look for him, pick him up, stash him, or start him at your flex this week because of the good matchup. But he's my last one at wide receiver. And that pretty much rounds out my wide receiver list. Now we're going to jump right on into the craps of fantasy football, the tight end position. And number 1, honestly, has been easy and really been on this for the last couple of weeks. Probably should have been number 1 last week, but Taysom Hill for New Orleans, owned in 39.7% fantasy leagues. This week he's going to be at Minnesota. I've been telling you, I hope you picked him up because he is going to be probably blown up because, really, I just hope you didn't miss out because he's currently ranked at least at the top 8. He was top 9 before he put up 22 fantasy points this past week. He's going to at least be 8 in tight end, but he's put up at least 12 points in fantasy in the last 4 weeks, and he's put up at least 22 points in the last 2 weeks. And he's pretty much tight end cheat code right now. He's getting production in passing, receiving, rushing. They're using him all over the place in this offense, and he's getting a great matchup at Minnesota this week in what look normally kind of like a rivalry game for the Saints. So pick up Taysom Hill, start him. There's a couple, bye weeks are still going on. Darren Waller goes down. Dallas Goedert goes down. If you got either one of those guys, he's your best option to pick up and start this week. Number 2 for me is going to be Trey McBride. Last week, probably should have flipped these 2 last week, but I didn't. Just because I think Trey McBride's going to eventually be more productive. As we got the news that Kyler Murray is going to be starting at quarterback, this really boosts Trey McBride's fantasy potential. And honestly, last week, I tried to warn you to be careful. Didn't have the stat line what we hoped for, obviously, as he comes in there. And let's see, I didn't put that in my notes, that stat line. But last week, like I said, very disappointing, but 5 targets, 3 catches for 22 yards against Cleveland. But I told you, Cleveland was the number 1 defense against tight ends in the league. And this week, he gets a lot better matchup against Atlanta, especially with Kyler Murray coming back. Honestly, Atlanta's 23rd ranked defense in the league against tight end, giving up an average of 13.4 fantasy points. And honestly, I think that's around what you expect for him to come out somewhere in there. With this offense being able to move the ball a lot better, he should get more red zone opportunities now with Kyler Murray being back. Honestly, I like Trey McBride rest of year for sure in this offense, especially with Kyler Murray being back. Number 3 for me is going to be Cade Otton, guy that's been on this list before. Kind of fell off right after their bye because he had a big dud that he laid, but really the last 3 weeks He has been very productive with at least 6 targets in the last 3 weeks. And last week had a great matchup and capitalized completely with 9 targets, 6 catches for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he played 100% of the snaps last week. This week, another decent matchup against Tennessee. But the Tampa Bay defense really has looked worse than it has all year the last couple weeks. And that really, to me, tells me that Tampa Bay is going to be probably playing in more shootouts for the second half of the season. And I think in that case, you're going to want Cade Otton on your team and could be very productive in the second half of the season. It's going to give him more targets because you're going to have to throw the ball more red zone opportunities for Otton going forward. I really just think he's a great fill-in for Waller or Goddard going forward. I like Cade Otton a lot, especially this week against Tennessee. And then last but certainly not least, a guy that I'm not completely sold on, but he's got to be on this list because the last 2 weeks he's had solid weeks. That's going to be Jake Ferguson for the Dallas Cowboys, owned in 59.3% of leagues, but this week gets a really good matchup against the Giants. But honestly, I decided to put him on here just because he's had good weeks the last 2 weeks. He blew up last week against Philadelphia, 10 targets, 7 catches for 91 yards and a touchdown. And that makes a touchdown for him in the last at least 1 touchdown the last 2 weeks. And honestly, ever since the bye, he's been pretty solid for him. But this week he gets the lowly Giants, which this could go one of 2 ways. Either they put up a lot of points, their offense just gets rolling and just blows the doors off the Jets completely, which they might do because the Jets and the Giants and the Cowboys are a big rivalry game. But also, this could be where the Cowboys get up big early and they don't throw the ball a lot at all in this game because they're able to move the ball so well on the ground. And it kind of limits the production for the pass catchers for Dallas because they just are able to run the ball and get up and control the clock. Not to mention Dallas's defense has a good chance to put up points on defense and also limit the opportunities of the Giants to even honestly, this would be one that like you could make a bet that the New York Giants don't even move. Like it'd be a solid chance that the Giants offense doesn't even get past the 50-yard line hardly all this whole game, unless there's a turnover. Because Dallas's defense has been so good and the Giants offense has been so depleted of playmakers, especially on their third string quarterback. And their number 1 pass catcher's out. It's just a bad scenario for the Giants offense in general. And Dallas's defense has scored a fair amount of points. They could put up more points than the offense could this game, honestly, and controlling the game. But Jake Ferguson has been productive. He could be somebody that if you lost Waller or Goddard, you might could pick up and could help you a lot, especially with bye weeks going forward. You could do worse than taking a flyer on Ferguson. So he's number 4 on my list, and that's going to round out my position players streaming. And then I'm going to go in waivers, and then I'm going to give you some streaming options at defense. Yes, this one kind of busted for me last week against Baltimore, but that does not change the fact that Seattle's defense has much improved, and they signed a playmaker to their defensive line. But this week they get Washington, who's not at all Sam Howell turns the ball over. He's going to break a record for the most sacks in a season, no doubt this year. So Seattle's defense going to be at home against Washington. Great matchup right here to stream Seattle's defense against Washington's offense. And then secondly, there's really not a lot of great other options, but Green Bay at Pittsburgh is a great option. Kenny Pickett just does not look great this year, guys. Their run offense has not been great. Really, the Pittsburgh offense in general has not been great. Green Bay's defense has not been what it should be, but it has been fairly productive in good matchups, and this is a good matchup against Pittsburgh. So those are my 2 streaming defenses for you this week. And that's pretty much going to round out this pod for your waiver picks for Week 10. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We appreciate everybody. Please like, subscribe, download. Give us your feedback on your podcast application of choice. We really appreciate everybody. Please go out and support our sponsors. Say some prayers for our prayer requests, Norcade, Jonesboro, and Israel. We appreciate all of our listeners out there. And we'll be back with you later on this week with our start, sit, sleeper pod. Y'all keep chasing that trophy and good luck on your waivers.